Hello, hello. It's Nadine here, and I'm here with this week's episode of Life, Health, and the Universe. And I'm joined by my guest today, and I've done it again, Bindi Robertson. I think your maiden name's Thomas. It's not the other way around, is it?
Yes. No,
Yeah.
Thomas's maiden name. Yep.
Yeah,
You got
cool.
that right.
So I've got this bad habit of forgetting to clarify pronunciations and name information. Bindi Robertson, thank you for joining me today, Bindi.
No worries. No worries.
Dialing in from New Zealand. We've flagged that there may be some kind of little bit of delay or glitchiness with the internet, so keeping our fingers crossed that all flows okay. But just for the listeners, if there does seem to be a little bit of pause, that could be why. So let me do a quick intro of you, Bindi, and then I'm going to hand over to you. And I'll kind of let the listeners know how we came to be in this conversation together, how our paths have crossed. So where do I start? I'm going to start with motherhood because it's a pretty damn important role that we play in this life. And sometimes we forget how important it is. So you're a mum of two girls living in New Zealand, as I said, and you are, well, what will we say? You're a sustainability specialist. That's one of the things you do, I believe. You've been associate lecturer on natural resource policy. You've got a PhD in natural resource management. You've got a master's of climate change. These are all super important things, topics. You've got a strong desire to contribute to conservation. So, they're just some of the top ones that I picked out of the huge list of things that you've done over your lifetime so far. And yeah, you've traveled, you're a tennis player. What else can I say? You've done a whole bunch of things in a relatively short time in your life. And here we are today. We're going to talk about a few of those things. I'm sure, number one could potentially be climate change, sustainability, those sorts of things, because they're things that are hot topics in the world today. But keen to learn more about you and all of the things that you do. So before I ramble anymore, welcome. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation to join me today. And let me hand over to you. Give us an intro of you, Bindi Robertson, as you see yourself.
Yeah, well, gosh, when I hear it all sort of read back to me, the word that comes to mind is quite chaotic. But yeah, so hearing it all like that is quite interesting to me, and this is a really interesting process. This whole podcast for me to kind of reflect on everything, because trying to make sense of the decisions you make sometimes with what you do with your life and how then it all fits together, and is quite a cool process. I think I've always just been someone who really just wants to see everything, kind of learn everything, and eke out every opportunity that life throws. And sometimes that means sort of making quick decisions, not sort of super quick bad decisions, but having to kind of make some big decisions about changes and stuff to take advantage of an opportunity. And yeah, so I think I kind of open to all of that stuff all the time, and it's just led me on a path of, as I mentioned, maybe on my CV looks quite chaotic, but can actually be a bit of a curse at times. But I think I feel like it's a really nice way to live. You're never quite sure of the decisions you make, I suppose, and the directions you go in. But yeah, if you stick to your kind of life ethos, I think you really can't go wrong in that respect. So yeah, as a general background of my thoughts on all of that stuff that I've done, I think it's really comes down to my hunger for seeing and learning and experiencing, and and now taking my girls on that journey, and my husband, bless him, I think if we hadn't got together, probably would have gone home after work every night, sat on a sofa and ate pizza. But instead, he was smart enough to never say no to my ideas, and he's always been supportive. So yeah, they've come along now on this sort of journey with me. So it's quite fantastic, actually. I look back on it so far, and super pleased with all these decisions. But yeah, there is the serious side of, I guess, some of the things that I've studied and looked at, in quite heavy topics with conservation and with climate change and all of those, as you say, quite hot topics at the moment. So happy to talk about, yeah, any of that stuff or elaborate on those things.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so thank you for joining me. I'll give the listeners a little bit of a like insight into how we came across
Yeah.
one another. So one of my personal training clients is a very good friend of yours.
Yes.
And she knows that I've been doing the podcast for a while, and she said, "Oh, you must talk to Bindi. She's done all of this amazing work in conservation. You know, she saved the albatross." So you'll be able to tell us a bit
I
about
always
that.
laugh at hearing her recollection. Yeah. Yeah.
And just, you know, you've done, as I said in my intro, you've traveled and you know, and you've also touched on the fact that now you're bringing your girls into it, and your husband's come along for the ride as well. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and you've given us a great intro and lots of different directions we could go in already. I didn't think that your life looked chaotic at all.
I always
Isn't
kind of
it
look at
funny
it.
how we
Yeah,
have these perceptions of ourselves? Maybe it's
I
because
know.
the way I read it out is like didn't seem like it was in very good order. I was just like, these are some of the things that popped out to me. I'm like, this is
Yeah.
really, like, to me, impressive. And I think that, and I think we touched on this when we first started making, you know, plans to have this call. You were like, "Oh, I don't really know if I've got very much to talk about." And when you sent that through, I was like, "I don't know if an hour is going to be long enough.
Yeah, that's
Maybe we need to
interesting,
do
isn't
like
it?
3 episodes or something."
Yeah, I mean, that's very sweet of you to say, and I guess, yeah, I don't know why. I guess for me, you just do something
Yeah.
and then you kind of move on to the next thing. And but certainly, as you mentioned, our mutual friend Narelle, who's a very, very good friend of mine. In fact, I think she's probably one of the few people in this world who don't annoy me. She's just such a rock solid person, and I've known her for so long now. We've just had so many good times. So, but always hearing her recollection of the things I've done is quite amusing, because she doesn't always get it right, but she certainly tries. But yeah, that was at a time, I guess, straight out of high school, where we met at college and at university, and we were on the same tennis team, and first time we'd met, and we were having a team meeting sort of at the table with the coach and the other players and stuff. And someone said something at the table, and me and Narelle were the only ones that laughed, and we really belly laughed, the two of us, and no one else did. And I think that was just how our friendship started. And so that was then years of, of living that experience together in the States, and doing the sporty thing. And then for me, coming back and trying to figure out, because I guess when sports dominates, sometimes you can sometimes get a bit derailed on kind of what your, I guess, real future should be like. I don't mean real future to minimize sports, but for me, it was going to end at college. So I really needed to figure out what the next stage was. And I had done a degree in business and economics, and I'd been to see the tutor and asked him, what could I do with this once I had finished? I talked to him for an hour and came out none the wiser. So kind of didn't know how to apply what my degree was. So found myself back in New Zealand, and then started doing some post-grad things to sort of start refining maybe what my future could look like. And then started developing a really strong interest in conservation and the environment, and kind of ended off going off in that direction. Met an amazing professor at Massey University who got me on the right track of doing my PhD. Incredibly supportive man who just found my passions and let me turn that into something to study. That's what really captures me, and I think that's actually what's really special about a lot of research, is people get to really hone in on something small and what their passions are, and just, learn a lot about it. So then I found myself sort of going from the tennis thing, swinging into, I guess, academia in that way, and in South Africa, darting elephants.
Wow.
In Darwin, Australia, I had four case studies. It was the African elephant in South Africa in Kruger National Park, and then the estuarine crocodile in Darwin. So we went out in the boat and captured a crocodile to attach a tracker to, and then there was a New Zealand falcon, and then the Northern Royal albatross is what Narelle talks about in south of New Zealand. So that was really all about learning about the tracking technology and how it can help conserve species. So sort of found myself there.
Wow. How does that
So
all work when you do, so when you do a PhD and you go to, like you've mentioned that you went to like multiple different countries, you're darting animals, you're putting tracking devices on them. How does that all work from a logistics point of view when you're essentially a student?
yeah,
Is there a group
yeah.
of you that are all interested in the same thing, and you all kind of like,
Well, it's a
do you have
great
to apply
question.
for
Yeah.
funding to do it? Like, how does it all work?
There is a lot of funding required for those
Mm,
sorts of things. And it seemed that there was enough funding for those sorts of things. And my professor, as I mentioned, who was an amazing man, he seemed to have a real knack for finding funding for these things. And
okay.
he's South African himself, so he was always involved in the projects. He was always with me. We did them all together. But there is a lot of funding required and a lot of setup. There were 4 different case studies in 4 different countries on 4 different species. So you have to kind of each of those involved little projects in themselves to make sure the ethics were covered and all the right people were involved, and you kind of weren't stepping on anyone's toes in their own country and things like that. So there's a fair bit involved, but certainly the funding is fundamental to it all. And in fact, it would have been better that if we had more funding, we could have got a bigger sample size on all of these things. But the funding is the limitation sometimes, and oftentimes with research, I guess, and that you can only do as much as the money allows. So it's definitely a thing. Yeah.
So can you talk us through like a bit about what you did and how long it took and what the outcomes were when it came to this research?
Yeah. And so it was basically, I think I'll just sort of mention, it was to assess the satellite tracking technology, which was just emerging at the time. So being able to track animals and wildlife in inhospitable environments from your desk, essentially, being able to track where they go and what they do without having to get out there in the field and be exposed to the dangers of it or the harshness of it or the expense of it, all this field work. It was kind of starting to become this technology that could actually provide a lot of information on these species at little cost and little effort in that respect. And that's not to discount how important fieldwork is, because it certainly is. It was all the different species required different types of tracking technology because they were different sized animals and they had different like the birds, as opposed to a crocodile, you got to fit a little harness on a bird. With a crocodile, you kind of got to attach it to its back of the neck, and for the elephant it's a big collar around its neck, and the albatross was attached just by the wings as well, not dissimilar to the falcon. But just understanding all of the different needs of the different species, and then just really trying to see, is this actually going to add some value or is it just a fun toy? And so in the end, the sort of outcomes of it were that we basically got all the individual ecological information on each individual animal, so we could learn individually about where they go, what they do, and how best to protect them. So that was kind of the basic outcome of the basic practical outcome of the research is, we could see the albatross were crossing the ocean and they were interacting with fishing boats at this certain time of day, and that's often where they get caught as bycatch and stuff. So understanding how maybe those routes can change and that sort of thing. it also sort of highlighted that it was actually a really good tool for involving people, because they could visually see where these animals were going. And a couple of the case studies I did, I had a website, and I would put the results on there for people to follow where the crocodile was going in Darwin, or where the albatross were across the Southern Ocean, and where they ended up and all that sort of thing. It actually, for schools and classrooms and that kind of thing, it actually got quite a bit of following from all of that. So, the technology kind of provided us with that. But there are some downsides to it. It's pretty invasive, to attach. You try and do it as ethically as you can, but in the end, attaching a device to an animal, and especially a bird who needs to fly, you have to be very careful that it's not going to actually affect its behavior. That's a big deal to me, and a big deal to a lot of people doing that kind of research. And also, I guess now, I sort of finished it 10 years ago, so now the technology is changing and everything's just becoming smaller. It used to be a compromise between battery power and number of readings you wanted to get, but now everything's miniaturized, and it's almost like they're doing mass tracking of animals now. And I guess at some point you kind of hope that maybe they've got enough information that can stop tracking them and just really learn what we've learned from now, and collaborate all the information together so that there's no repetition in tracking the animals, because, as I say, it's quite invasive. But yeah, that's kind of the general gist of that research. So yeah, we got some really good outcomes from it, and I had a lot of fun doing it as well. Yeah.
What did you what did you enjoy most about it? Like, when you say you had a lot of fun out of it, is it like watching what the animals do? Like, are there surprises? Was it unexpected what you enjoyed about it, or?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to expect about the whole thing. I mean, I love working independently, and a lot of it was working independently. I would just go down to the local library cafe with my computer and do my work there, and sort of meet up with people every now and again as I needed to. But mostly, yeah, it was going on the field trips and being able to see these animals and where they live, and really get an understanding of their environment, because, as I say, the field work is important. But yeah, a lot of them did some really unique things, and things that, especially the albatross, like no one had tracked any juveniles from their nest ever. And so to see where a juvenile goes from the first time it leaves its nest was super exciting. And, we were watching, like every day I'd go to download the information. I'd be like, oh, where's it going to be? And, that's essentially why I had the website for others to follow that sort of thing as well. So yeah, it was just interesting stuff. Yeah.
So once you'd finished how long did that go for, that research? Was it quite a few years, or?
So that was probably, I think I did 2 years part-time and then about 2.5 years full-time. So it was about 4.5 years by the time I'd submitted and got it all finished. And the thesis was essentially 6 published papers all put together into the thesis. So I'd already, well, at the time of submission of the thesis, had already published my papers. Sometimes people publish their thesis and then they go on to turn those theses into published papers, but I just went like a bull at a gate, I guess. Just did it all beforehand. So it was all done in a nice tidy package on submission of my thesis, which makes it easier for marking, because if your markers of your thesis know it's already been out there and peer reviewed, the whole process becomes quicker. It's sort of more legitimized if you hand in a thesis of published papers, as opposed to just your own writing. So yeah, I think it was sort of 4 to 5 years, I'd say, of work on that.
Wow. And were you, how old are your girls?
So they're 11 and 13.
So were you
when I
pregnant when you would?
So I got pregnant 6 months before I submitted my research.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, my supervisor just always used to just talk about how incredibly organized I was, and I think I was, but then to sort of time the pregnancy so well, like it wasn't it wasn't like, it wasn't planned like that. But I submitted, had her 6 months later, but then I did the defense of it when she was 6 months old. So you defend your research at some point once they've marked it. So she
Wow.
was 6 months when I did that. So and then, so I think that was the timeline. So yeah, I sort of timed it, I guess when I just finishing, and that I can't imagine having done it like some people do, try and do those things with small babies.
So
Yeah,
11
no.
and 13, is that what you said? They were 11,
Yes.
13?
Yeah. Yes.
So
Yeah.
did you finished your PhD, had a baby 6 months later. So did that
Yeah.
mean that you kind of were on hold then? You
Yeah,
had
so
two kids, so it kind of like you're
it's
on a bit of
interesting.
a roll with your education and
Yeah.
learning and writing a PhD paper and
Yeah.
your thesis and then motherhood.
Yes, yeah. So I
Was
was
that
36.
in the direction you were kind of
See, that's interesting
expecting to
because
go?
I remember not really having a plan for motherhood. I just kind of felt like I'll see how I feel and how it's going. And so, I was 36 when I had her, so I sort of knew that it was sort of, getting to the the tail end of, I guess, what they call, what do they call,
Maternal
old
age.
age, old age pregnancy, whatever they call that.
Yeah, I had one of
Um,
them.
yeah.
I had two of them actually.
Yeah, I did, and so my second one was at 38, and
Yeah. Okay.
so I really just had her. I submitted and then defended, and then I just fell in love with her, and my time with her was me and her against the world, and so we were in this little bubble, and I just couldn't have imagined, unless unless I really had to, just having not been focused on her in those at that time, and
Mm,
then I guess having the next one, you sort of doubly feel that way. But I always had in the back of my mind, what am I gonna do? How long can I wait? Or if I do wait too long, will I be able to get back in it? Will time have changed? Will the technology have changed? That those sorts of thoughts went through my head constantly whilst I was trying, to enjoy motherhood.
mm,
So it's a really difficult one. It's a great question because how do you balance it? How can you give everything to both sides? I don't know how people do it. People must. I don't know if I could have. So I did kind of have to do one or the other for a period anyway. But I never sit still long enough. So I did do lots of things that, they're kindy, and
oh yeah.
I still marked. There was one paper I marked it through Massey, and I was always trying to read stuff to keep up to date on things. But in the end, if you're not in the paid work, you kind of do fall behind, and that's just kind of what I had to accept, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because you kind
Mm.
of because doing all of the stuff that you were doing before kids, it's all very much about
Yeah.
your personal interest, your personal journey. And
Yes.
although motherhood is exactly that as well, it's
Yeah.
you're going through a massive personal journey when you become a mother, but you're basically giving you
Yeah.
I don't want to say giving up, but
I know it's
it can feel a bit like that. You kind of have to surrender to the fact that you are no longer just for you or something. Do
yeah.
you know what I mean? I
It's
don't know if I
exactly
can
right.
quite find the
Yeah.
words for it, but
I know, and it's interesting that you're struggling to find the words for it because I do too. Like, you don't want to. How do you articulate that choice to your children without them feeling like you gave something up,
mm,
for them? I don't know how. I still don't know the words to use. I think I said something once to someone about it, and my daughter was in earshot, and she was like, "Oh," she was a little bit like, you know, like hurt by what I said. And I certainly didn't intend that, but I felt like, geez, I have to really choose my words here, for talking about this situation, because it is you do give up yourself,
yeah,
and that is
yeah.
just parenthood, I suppose. But how do
Comes as a
you
bit of a shock, doesn't it?
yeah. Yeah, so how
Because
old are
look,
your
because you
kids?
can't. I'm just turned 50 last week.
Right, I'm me like 3 months ago. Yeah.
So I had my kids 40 and 42. I was.
Yeah.
So they're 8 and 9.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, right. So 8 and 9 now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you know all of this
Mm.
stuff. It's
But it's like, you kind of, I think, because, having babies and reproducing the species is kind of like what we're here to do. So you just assume that everything's going to be okay, and
yeah,
everything generally is okay. But like, there's no preparation
right.
for, like, you're not going to know
Yeah.
who the hell you are anymore.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you're going to
And
have to
what happens
give
when
up all
you
of
do
that
stay
stuff.
at home?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the longer you do stay at home, you do lose confidence to a certain degree. I don't know
Yes.
why that happens, and you do second guess yourself, and
Mm.
and you sort of maybe, especially you're at home with kids, you sort of become a bit of a hermit, and you're like, oh, I'm just like a shell of myself, I guess, in
Mm.
some ways. But
When
again, how do you
you've been a
articulate
massive
that?
go-getter traveling around the world, like,
Yeah, yeah, and I loved it. They're beautiful moments, like no regrets.
mm,
But it is yeah,
yes.
it's a tricky thing to first of all process and secondly articulate to your children. Like,
Mm,
how would I tell them about that time of my life?
yeah.
Um, and make them appreciate what you do, but not lay it on too thick. And it's
Mm. I've
yeah,
been wondering recently, just with all this kind of stuff, like, well, firstly, I part of me, like, I know that motherhood is kind of underrated, right? It's not, it's
yes,
not at,
yes,
in today's society, it's not really seen
yes,
as enough to just be a mum. So that can be
yes,
difficult. So we're kind of seeking, like,
yes.
who am I outside of motherhood, because motherhood's not enough.
Right, right.
Like, I wonder if there's a little bit of that going on. But
Yeah,
also, I wonder if when people have children when they're younger, what, like, how that could be different, because they're coming
yeah,
out the other side, and their kids, for I I mean, we've got friends who've got kids who are going into their teens, and um early 20s kind of thing.
yeah.
What's it like for them coming out the other side when they've had their youth kind of taken up with parenting?
Right, right,
And I
right.
wonder how that might be different.
Yeah, the younger versus the older
Yeah.
parental experience.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. But I know for me, I was not ready to have kids a second earlier than
Oh, no
36,
way.
and I was prepared for the prospect I might not be able to have them by the time I
Mm.
decide I was ready, and I was okay. I'd made peace with that. But then I guess, sometimes you don't have a choice about when it happens. Or sometimes some people are just like, I just want to be a mum as early
Mm.
as possible, and that's cool too. Because
Yeah.
yeah, it is just must be a different experience, however you do it.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
Totally.
because as you say, like I'm turning 50 now, you're 50, and then that brings like, the whole other the whole menopausal topic,
Oh, yeah.
and like how does that fit in with raising children? Because
Mm.
someone said to me, well, a couple of weeks ago, they said that that's possibly one of the reasons why having kids at an older age, it can be tricky, is because you kind of have to go through that menopause with them
Mm.
still quite young and susceptible, which may or may not
Yeah.
be a bad thing because kids are resilient and all that stuff. But yeah, like they kind of like my mum, I would have been well left the house by the time she went through menopause, and was sort of trying to figure those things out for
Mm.
yourself. Some people hit worse, some people it doesn't bother at all. But for some, yeah, it is a thing, and it can affect their lives for a period of time.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, who knows what the right time to have a kid is really.
No,
So personal.
totally. Yeah. And like you said,
Yeah, yeah.
weren't ready like a minute
No,
before.
yeah, no.
No, like, quite literally 6 months, actually.
Yes. Yeah, gosh, that would have thrown me right off my axis, yeah, but I guess you cope and you deal with it and, yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
how about, like, once you'd had your two babes,
yeah.
when did you there was a point where you were like, right, I got to get back into some of this stuff. When did that happen?
Yeah, so
How
that
old were
kinda
they?
yeah, that was happening the whole way through, but it got louder in my head when they started school, for sure. And that's when I sort of thought, right, I've got to reread everything here that I've learned and see where the technology's at, and has it changed in the last five years, or I mean 6 years by the time my second daughter started school? Has it changed? How can I get back in, and in what way can I get in? So I sort of spent some time while they were at school, like relearning it all, and maybe doing a few refresher courses on the technology and things like that. And then, just sort of thought, well, maybe I'll do some consulting, and I'll go, because I had done a little bit of that before kids. Maybe I'll get back into doing that. And as I looked and I learned more about it, and just noticed that there's just some big conglomerates out there that are just tracking everything with these tiny transmitters, and they've just kind of got it covered now. Technology has changed, and I don't know what more I could add, short of, I guess, working for one of those places, perhaps. But it was kind of, as I was looking into all of that, I sort of started, the whole climate change thing started weighing down on me, and I'm like, but, that's the big overarching problem. If climate change isn't sorted, the species won't matter. So I started sort of being drawn to kind of, how can I pivot a little bit into this climate change world, because that seemed like the most pressing issue. Gosh, conservation of wildlife is still pressing, but that seemed like, to me, the overarching issue. So I was just like, how can I be the most useful? How can I get back in there, and be as useful as possible? And so I kind of went on. Have you heard of Earthwatch?
Yeah.
It's like so I did a couple of those, and you go and you volunteer in a research capacity for different projects around the world. So it's kind of, you do a bit of a travel experience as well. But, and I thought I'll just do a couple of these to kind of get myself back out there in the world, talking to scientists and researchers and stuff, and enjoying a bit of travel. They were only 2 weeks long each. So I did a few of those and came out at the end going, yeah, definitely climate change. And that's when I signed up and did a bit of a pivot. And it was a year-long master's course at Vic University here in Wellington, which was just perfect. I couldn't have done 2 years. I thought that's too long. I've done enough. But 1 year I can do. And then so I did that, and then that translated into a job for 18 months after that, which was in renewable energy, and sort of the corporate voluntary side of climate change. So just thoroughly enjoyed learning about it all, getting all the information for myself, and not just hearing all around me what's going on, and then turning it into a job that I really did enjoy. So I sort of feel like it went along that line. I call it, most people call it a bit of a pivot. It was a bit of a pivot. I just, that's kind of where it ended up.
Did you say that you were working for corporate?
Well, so the job I got just after that master's was, it's in the corporate voluntary world. So not to do with government compliance, but the voluntary world on climate action. Yep. So how are corporates, what action are they taking, which, as I say, is voluntary. They're not required to yet.
Okay.
And what does that look like, and how are they doing it? And so the company I worked for offered a market-based mechanism product, not dissimilar to an offset, but it was to do with specifically renewable energy. So they could buy clean energy, know that it's not being double counted, know that it's being as much as it could possibly be, and given to them, and within their carbon accounting records, they can deduct or can contribute to the goals that they have, which are often the zero carbon by 2050 or all of those things. So it's it can be a bit controversial, because some people think it's just it's not really what it says it is, and it's there are issues with offsets and that sort of thing. So it was interesting to be in an environment where it was controversial, which I'm such a bit of a purist. It kind of challenged me in having to defend it all the time, because I did believe that it was good and was doing some good. yeah, that was an interesting dynamic, I thought. But there's a lot of good stuff going on in the corporate world. There really is, and
Yeah.
I was quite surprised by that. So that was, yeah, that was positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From you, so we hear in the news, that us, like general populations, not the corporates, but just us living our everyday lives as parents,
Yep.
or whatever we're doing, we hear about climate
Yep.
change, we hear about global warming, the
Yep.
changes in weather patterns, we hear about like carbon footprint, and
Yep.
um, it can feel a little bit confusing
Yes, absolutely.
and overwhelming,
Yes.
and it
Yes.
doesn't, I mean, and there's this whole stuff with farmers and um,
Yep.
emissions and that sort of stuff, and
Yeah.
it's like, what choices do we make?
Yeah.
But I think what can happen is that you kind of go, it's too big to even make any decisions about this. Right?
Yeah.
And so not
Yeah.
do anything, because we don't feel empowered to make choices that we feel might have a
Yeah.
positive impact. What would
Yeah.
you say as a what would you say are the biggest things that we could do? And what do you do
Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
lifestyle to reduce your impact, I guess?
Yeah. So I guess, it just as a starting point, it's an incredibly complex issue.
Mm,
Like, people talk
totally.
about it, and liken it to trying to change out the engine of a plane while it's still flying,
Yeah.
like really complex decisions, not mostly because they are financial decisions and people struggle with that, but also it is
Mm,
all behavior. Like, it's like almost like the most complex issue that we'll have to solve. Um, and so, there are words floating around and people, reading different things,
mm,
and it's absolutely so confusing. That was one of the reasons I wanted to go and learn for myself, how these things work. But the nuts and bolts of it, really, in terms of people's daily lives, from my understanding, and from, like, I calculated all our emissions as a family last year on our holiday, like everything we did, as much as I could possibly do that. And you just cannot get past the fact, no matter what you kind of do with, you can reduce your meat intake, you can reduce your dairy intake, you can change to renewable energy or minimize your energy use. You can, drive an electric car, given if the grid is, good enough, that makes a difference. You just basically can try and move less and buy less things, is kind of the
you
general
mean like
gist.
move
But
less as in
no matter
travel?
what you do, yeah, but no matter what you do with all of that stuff, if flying on an airplane just blows it all out of the water. So all those all those changes you can make, which are really good anyway and do make a difference, they pale in comparison to jumping on a flight somewhere in this day and age where we haven't got sustainable fuels yet, or we haven't got hydrogen planes, or those kinds of things, which are coming, but they're not there yet. No matter what way I looked at our emissions, like the flight emissions just blew everything out of the water all the time. And there's no way around it other than to fly less and to really think about your flying. And if you have to do it, that's all good. But if you don't have to do it, maybe try not to. And none of us are going to get it right all the time. But yeah, that's basically the general gist of
Mm,
kind of what people can do in their daily lives. The other thing which is effective is informing yourself as much as you can and pushing the political people where you can. That's effective too. Um, so yeah, but again, all of those things are not easy for people to do. People get comfortable in their lives, and um, if you have the resource to travel, how do you stop yourself doing that? So it is tricky, but
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
It's like mixed messaging as well, isn't it? It's like,
yeah,
if you've kind of said that, flying is one of the biggest, or the biggest as far as you
yeah,
can see, like from your perspective and your experience. And we know this,
Yeah.
but you're still allowed to fly. No one's
Yeah.
stopping you.
I
So it's
know.
like mixed message. They're still like,
Yeah. I know. Yeah. And there's all these
airlines need to, that,
yeah.
and it's like,
And then
well,
they try and sell you cheap airfares.
if it
You're
was
like, that's
really bad
counter
for
to
you,
yeah.
surely the government would cancel flying,
Yeah. And
ban flying because it was bad for the planet. If it's that bad,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of,
And herein lies the complexity of it, really, because
yes.
for the economy to and this is the real because I was a bit of an idealist, and I exactly like what you said. I'm like, let's just stop doing things. Let's just
Mm,
stop. Even for a short period of time. Like, let our generation be the ones that take a hit just for 5 years or something. Just
mm,
take a hit, and let's all just stop. But if we stop, then the economy grinds to a halt. It's almost like we need to keep buying and keep moving to keep the economy going,
mm,
which keeps, social systems going. And it's a really difficult one.
yeah,
Because if you stop buying, then money stops being given to, people for wages and, that kind of
yeah,
thing. So
yeah,
I guess the only, the probably not the only hope, because that's not right, but it's really about businesses, about packaging, I suppose packaging the products we buy better and putting them, if they have to be transported, putting them on systems that are renewable, use renewable fuels. And, it's almost like the
mm,
whole system, if the big ticket items get dealt with in terms of transportation,
yeah,
and some production materials and all those kinds of things, then, the impact of purchasing won't be as bad and stuff like that. So
yeah.
these things are definitely happening. It's just, the time frame of when they'll be
Mm.
done, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose
Yeah.
having, like, from a consumer point of view, having an
Mm.
awareness, if it's something that you're concerned about and you're like, well, I don't travel, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what else can I do? Or like, if
Yeah.
everyone else is still traveling, but it's like,
Right.
you can look in
Yeah.
the supermarket and you can go, that produce is from Spain and I
Yeah.
live in
Yeah.
Australia. So
Yeah.
like, if I don't
Yeah.
buy it and if people stop buying it, then
Yes.
the
Yes.
demand for it is going to reduce. And
Absolutely.
so they're the kinds of things that over time could
Absolutely.
have an impact. And it's the same with any
Yep.
produce. You can look
Yep.
at where it's from, where it's produced, where it's, yeah, like
Yep.
you get jars that are made in, or packet stuff that's made in Thailand. Like, try and find stuff that's made
Yeah.
in the country that you're
Locally.
buying it from. Um,
Yeah. Absolutely.
those kind of things.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Absolutely.
it's increasing our awareness, isn't it, about
Yeah.
those things?
Yeah.
Because
I guess then
the
yeah.
transportation of stuff is like a big one.
Big one. All of those things come on ships and planes and all sorts of
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
And I guess, it's interesting because I was so hardcore about my kids walking to school and my kids, me not being one of those parents who, sitting in their SUV at 3 o'clock, like clogging
Yeah.
the roads and all that. I was so hardcore about the poor things. Um, and also me and my husband like biking into work, really
Mm,
hardcore. But then when I got an electric car, I actually went, oh, I can like like even I felt like I could relax on that stuff now or a little bit.
mm,
I mean, the
yeah,
grid here in New Zealand is, 90% renewable. So, but then there is still there's manufacturing emissions in building the car. There's no question about that. But given that that's already happened, I guess that sort of links into the transportation thing that
mm,
once those big ticket items start getting dealt with and the shipping is so they're inventing all kinds of things for those big ships with big sails and running on hydrogen and and the planes will get sustainable aviation fuels at some point. I guess when they do those big things, then your orange coming from California might be all right. It's not going to be the best. You should still buy locally, but it's not going to have the impact
mm,
perhaps, that it once had. And how will our purchasing decisions kind of change then again? And, it's a continually evolving beast of
mm,
things. And we don't always know what's in the pipelines of technology and what's coming out. There are so many things on the cusp, I feel like, that aren't quite yet commercial, that are coming out, that are going to solve some big problems. that fascinating things that, again, once we get all our behavioural decisions will all be set, and then we'll have to kind of change. Well, we'll be able to kind of change them again, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll start from scratch again. Like, it's like,
it's hard,
so
isn't
it's
it? Because
very
like I
difficult.
think as human beings we have innovation and
Yeah,
creation
constant.
and
Yeah,
it's constant, but often there can be like these cycles of 10 years or 15 or
yeah,
20 years and they go,
yeah,
oh, actually that
yeah. It's
it's
not
like
an issue anymore.
with fruit, or it's not an issue anymore,
Yeah.
or oh, it's got this side effect that we didn't
Yeah,
actually
right. Yeah, that
realize.
side,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
there's
for sure.
it's like with
Yeah,
processed foods,
yeah.
like it was all like, yay, TV dinners in the 80s, and then they're like, oh,
Yes.
we've got a massive crisis on our hands with
Yeah.
health.
Yes.
So
We just,
yeah,
yeah. Sometimes we're smart, sometimes not so
well, we're
smart, you
too
know?
smart for our own good, I think.
Yeah.
It seems to be what the case is a lot of the time.
Interesting. Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
oh, what was I going to say? I guess we're kind of like we've been cracking on for 45 minutes, and you've got a whole bunch of other stuff that you've done, including travel, which you touched on, like because you said that that was one of the things that you realized had a big impact, and
Right.
it's like way up.
Yeah.
But I'd love to talk to you just a bit before we have to start closing, about motherhood, traveling,
Yep.
and also like how you feel about the future of the planet as
Right.
a mother of two young people.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and then maybe like we talk about like you mentioned in one of your emails to me, like you're not sure what you're going to do next,
Yeah. Yeah, gosh.
and like how you weigh up that
Yeah.
parenting, your
Yep.
health, and getting that balance right. So I would love to have a
Yeah.
bit of a chat about that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think what I was working in that renewable energy job, and we, as a family, kind of always had in the back of our head, another reasonably long trip somewhere. And I think we were sitting in the hot tub for too long, and the idea just formulated quite quickly over about half an hour, and we were like, "Oh, really? Are we doing this?" And so yeah, so we embarked on, well, I finished up at that job. My husband finished at his job, and we embarked on the year away with the girls. They did online school, which is
Yep.
in New Zealand called Te Kura, which is amazing online schooling that you can do even if you're traveling. So as long as you're back within 2 years, you can just do this, and it follows your class curriculum, and you have a teacher, and it was super well organized. So that was one of the reasons that we could do the travel. And also my oldest is starting high school this year, so we thought our window's closing on opportunity time to do this. So yeah, let's just get out there and do it. Like, we felt comfortable out in the world. The idea was to do one return air ticket, to do it all on one ticket to Europe and back again, and then in between do bus, train, or other things like that. So that was the original plan. But when we got over there, my dad ended up getting diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Yeah, while we were 2 months into the trip, which was awful for him. Terrible timing. I'd been down the road, like 2 hours down the road from him for the last 2 years, and then, last 20 years, and then he got this diagnosis. So I came home by myself for 2 weeks in March to sort of figure out what was going on. We thought we had kind of till the end of the year. We thought it was kind of slow moving, but by mid-May, he'd passed away. So then all of us came back again. So our whole, I mean, aside from, the sort of sad occasion, the whole emissions side of things just got thrown out the window in those circumstances. But basically, yeah, we love skiing, and we started in Canada, ended in Canada at both winter times. And then in between was 10 months of just jumping around cheap Airbnbs in Europe and just finding the deals, and really not having anywhere that we had to be. So that was amazing. The girls had just started playing tennis just before we left, so we went to a few places that had tennis academies so that they could still interact with kids and get some time away from us. But yeah, super special time, but as you
Mm.
probably know, and so many others, traveling's not always glamorous, you know, there are times where it's really just moving day's a sweat day, and you just, you know, get your worst clothes on, and you're getting the suitcases out, and you're getting down
Oh
train,
yeah, such a drag.
you know, onto the train, off the train, on, you know, and
Yeah. Do we know where
and
everything
so,
is?
you know, yeah, and the living out of the suitcase, and
Mm.
the, you know, yeah, the travel side of it is certainly not glamorous, but the memories and the things the girls learned and the highlights on it for us was, um, yeah, I guess what I say to my husband is we're buying like old age insurance with all these memories, you know, like when you're sitting in a nursing home and your body stopped working, at least you can
Oh,
remember good
yeah.
times. You can go over them over and over in your head. So yeah, but it was lovely to be home. We got back to our animals. We had a house sitter looking after the animals, and that worked out amazingly. And yeah, so we're back home now, settling back in, and yeah, just back into normal life now. So I'm now trying to figure out, yeah, what my next move is, and you know, that's a kind of interesting topic, I guess, because I could very easily and likely will very easily get back into the sustainability thing, but I guess the thing that is just I'm just got to make sure I'm okay with is, as we talked about earlier, I've just turned 50,
Mm.
and working in the corporate world is inherently quite sedentary. You know,
Wow.
there's a lot of sitting for 8 hours a day. I'm just trying to figure out how I can do that whilst actually needing to move probably more in my life, you know, to get through old age than I than I not ever have. But so yeah, really just trying to figure out if it's not better for me, yeah, to figure out to do something health wise, or to do yeah, something different. But I don't want to give up on all the things that I feel passionate about. I love the headspace of the sustainability and climate change stuff, but the concept of sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day, yeah, it
Mm.
just sort of makes my heart break a little bit.
Well, especially
So
when you've done stuff that's out in the field and you know, like
yeah,
that
yeah,
side of
yeah.
that side of it.
Yeah, it's a shame that, to do that kind of work and a lot of other work, you do have to sit all day, like, because that is just so unhealthy. As you know, that's your whole ethos,
Mm.
with everything you do. Yeah, there has to be some kind of compromise, I suppose, but
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, just figuring all that stuff out, but I'd committed to not working the first term. I'll get the girls settled back into life and school and, all of that stuff. So, come the end of school holidays, which is end of October, I'll start making some decisions, some proper decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
kind of um it's kind of weird. Like what it's I don't know how to put it. Like there's this big global problem.
Yeah,
Um, but like you feel like there's you want to take physical action, right? You
right.
out there doing stuff, not sitting behind a desk talking about it,
Yeah, yeah, I
right?
know.
Or like theorizing
Yeah,
about like
yeah.
what someone could do. It's like you want to be out there kind of,
Yeah, you
yeah,
almost have to kind of take a bit of a hit
advocating or
physically and maybe mentally to solve some of these problems, you know, like they inherently involve the heavy topics,
mm,
and just in a sedentary corporate world that's just the structure of it. I don't
mm.
know if maybe the day could be broken up, a 2-hour work, and then you have 2 hours off to go and do, you know, it's like big chunks of where the whole day is completely different. I don't
You could
know.
all stand on treadmills and create energy
Ye yes,
to
yes,
run
imagine a
your
whole, like, office filled with that, you know? All of that stuff. It's just, yeah,
Mm,
it's interesting. And it's only really because, as we talked about a couple of times now, turning 50, you do reevaluate things, and you do, like, I do want to, I'm in it for the long haul. I want to be mobile and active
mm,
and
mm,
healthy, and, so, yeah, it's finding that balance, I guess,
mm.
the tricky part.
Yeah, when you so I'm just going to kind of start wrapping things up, but this
Yep.
and so this might not be the right question. I did mention like how do you feel with climate change and this, you know,
Yes.
with
State of the world.
your kids
All right, yeah.
growing up, but also
Yes.
like from a perspective of your own
Yeah.
health, future, like do you look at it from that kind of, you know, conservation point of view, where you're like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening to the planet, to the wildlife, you know,
Right.
to the ecosystems,
Yeah.
or or do you kind of go, how is this gonna impact me? Like, you've talked about how can I
Yeah.
help to improve my impact, but do you
Yeah.
on the other side of it think about how it could potentially impact you and your health and your family's health and their future and your future?
Yeah, that's interesting. I've worried about it for many years, like
Mm,
since I mean, you know, there's people that have worried about it way longer than me, but I think I started worrying about it probably year 2000.
right.
Um, like starting to get really concerned about things and wildlife and climate change,
Mm,
and sort of what led me to do the PhD and get involved in that, and then, you know, then the masters eventually. I think for me the concern reached its peak at I remember about 2018 to 2020. I got terrified by the concept of these massive global changes that can happen with the ice sheets and with the, you
right.
know, the water currents and the, you know, all these tipping points
Mm,
that they talk about. I got really terrified, and I felt super sad for a couple of years for my kids. I was like, what's their life going to be like? What,
mm,
you know, like it really took a toll on me. But then I think I came through it. My way of getting out of it was to learn about it, which is
mm,
why I did the masters. And I almost started, I think I almost like matured a little bit with my concern. I grieved for the earth
mm,
in some way. I think I must have. And then I just thought, well, all I can do, and I'm not going to solve this on my own because so many people working on it. It's going to involve multiple solutions, multiple people to solve it, not just me. I can only give what I can give. So I think I got to the point where I did start relaxing. I felt a bit more. I still wanted to work on it, but I felt a bit more philosophical, I suppose,
mm.
about it, which was better for my health
Yeah.
and better for me being around my kids. And I'm positive. I'm always positive with them about it. I tell them about it, but I finish with like, but there's all these great things happening, and I truly believe that. And I actually feel really positive that we'll figure this out.
Mm,
I'm glad I still feel positive, but I genuinely do, and I just see a lot of good things happening. And you know, someone said once it only takes maybe 2 or 3% of the population to affect change, and I think there's certainly 2 to 3% of the population that is behind this now.
mm,
So, if not more,
yeah.
um, but there's just some really smart people doing some smart things
Mm,
from what I can see and what I've read about. So I feel very positive, and I'm pleased that the terror it had in me has kind of subsided, because that's not a healthy way to live.
no, absolutely not.
Um,
No.
but and in the end, you can only do what you can do, and that's just the reality of it, I
Mm,
guess.
yeah.
And yeah, yeah.
Well, it sounds
Mm.
like you're doing some pretty special things in the world.
Well, who knows in the end, eh?
I have to
Really.
say, like, when I was in my teens, it was kind of at the beginning of the,
Right.
recycle and all of that. And I
Yep.
can remember, like, I had stashed paper. Everything was done, on paper. Um,
Yep.
we didn't use computers very much back then for school and studying. And I had a stash of paper to recycle in the bottom of my wardrobe in my bedroom. And my dad was like, what's the point in that? Blah, 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 waste of time, recycling.
Yeah,
just
yeah.
just my pile of paper. Um, oh, what was I going to say? And I didn't have
Right.
much hope for
Right.
the planet at that time
Yep.
in my life. Like, I certainly wasn't on a major downer about it, but I was a bit like, this is, you know,
Yeah.
the direction we're going in. And this was when I was
Yep.
17, 18.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and I never wanted to have kids because I thought
Mm.
the world's
Yep.
pretty messed up.
Yep.
I'm not
Totally
doing
get
it.
it.
Like,
Yeah.
and then it was when I came into my, the time of life, and I was in my late 30s,
Yep.
and we started to think about having kids, and I was like, well, yeah, the planet is in a bit of a mess. However, we could potentially be bringing the next generation in who are the change makers.
Yes. Yes,
And so
absolutely.
and there's so much innovation. There's so much entrepreneurship. People are getting really creative about stuff.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who is a futurologist.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
she did a little talk at the beginning of the year, it was on Instagram or whatever. And she said that I think she said like by 2040, there are going to be like most of the jobs that exist have never even been done before.
Right.
Yeah, like
Right.
there's just this massive
Massive change.
evolution, massive
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
And so I kind of think, our young generation, like if we can take care of ourselves a bit and take care of them and nurture them and
Yep.
do the wonderful work, like the sorts of things you're doing to educate them,
Yeah.
they can be the change makers.
Absolutely. It's actually amazing, as you say, for young people coming through, because they get to live in a world where you have to think outside the box. Like nothing's off the table. They get to create, they get to innovate, they get to, like, there's no barriers to what they can think of to solve some of these problems. And that must be super exciting to be involved in. So that's really positive and fun future for them in that respect anyway. Yeah.
No pressure.
I always say,
just save the planet, will you?
I often find myself saying to some kids who have some resource behind them, I'm like, well, it's good because you'll be expected to solve some big problems. So excellent. Let's just get on with it. I say that to kids all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Before we close, anything else you'd like to add? Any hot tips you want to give the listeners on, what we can do? I think you already mentioned some of the things that we can do in our everyday lives to help.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think, as we talked about, you can only do what you can do on some of those basic daily life things. But you also don't forget you have the right to still live a happy life, whatever that is, like you're allowed to do that. I, for a long time, felt guilty living life. Everything I did, I felt guilty about. And, and I felt to blame for this whole climate change. It started hundreds of years ago, when this generation is not to blame. Obviously, there are things we can do better, but don't beat yourself up, but just do what you can do. Yeah.
That's a great note to finish on. Thank you so much for joining
You're welcome.
me. I've really loved meeting you
fun.
Finally. And
yes,
good luck with whatever you plan on doing next.
Thank you. You too.
Sounds like you're doing some wonderful things. So just gotta keep doing it.
Keep on keeping on.
Keep on keeping on.
Yeah, that's
Thanks,
it.
Bindi.
No
Really
worries.
appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. Take care.
Okay. See
Bye.
ya.